2 days progress. Wow, I am absolutely wore out. I was going to try to make another motor bracket, but we figured out this one, so I'm saying good enough for today. We got our bolts in from Performance Adapters, and we got them all stabbed in there. I was able to get 3 threads with the locking washer. You know, you don't count the first thread, and then you count 3. And that's what we got. I just said give me a 2-inch bolt. You know, some of them are longer, some of them are shorter, whatever. You know, I know guys out there that would be like, oh man, you know, they dropped the ball or whatever. No, they did not. I called him up and, you know, they answered right away. Now, we got that motor plate on there. It's bolted up. I was able to get that plate that I made. I was going to cut a hole in it, cut a hole in that plate, and then make me another washer to the back side of it to where the bolt would just be in there. You know, it had to be shimmed out the thickness of that plate. Quit, sissy. And that way, you know, it would have a recessed bolt inside of that plate, and then you'd weld it up from the back or from the outside. But the way I figured it out was, I was like, wow, you know, maybe I just need to tighten it down tight and good. And that's what I did. So I just took the bolts, loosened the bottom ones up, and then just tightened the top ones until it sucked it down. And it did. It must be bending the metal. If that's good, it's make clearance. Obviously, we're going to take and grind it out fully and trim it up 100% so it looks nice and get it spray painted. You know, we're going to knock all that weld off there and smooth it up and make sure it looks, you know, decent, and weld it back up if we got to. If it's got too much of a pinhole in the weld, I was able to take 2 angle brackets, that 1 angle bracket, and welded the 2 together. You've seen the pictures. But here's the bracket. You know, I'm gonna finesse this up. It's got a paper whatever between that, but you know, it's touching the block here and there, right here. But it sucked it down tight. So I just loosened the bottom bolts up. This one, it's still slotted. Where I did slotted it, I was able to let it bend. You know, that one looks cross-threaded, but it's touching on that side. So that plate might be a little funky. It might be a little warbly. But I took that impact right there and ran her down. I loosened the bottom ones up and just ran them top ones all the way. They're tight as they can get, right up against the block, and those are tight against the block. We're going to take, and once we get our motor mount back on our frame rail, we'll take that motor mount, put it back on the frame rail, and then we'll take that other bracket. It'll probably have to be, it definitely need cleaned up with the flapper or whatever. We'll get a couple tack welds on it so where we can get them bolts back out of that motor. And once we get it apart, I'll weld it out solid. We'll weld our mount in on our frame solid. Once the motor is up against that bell housing, obviously, and it's in there, next thing's next, we need to work on the other one, but I'm pretty sure that would be plenty enough. Now, I'm going to have to trim on it, grind on it, bead on it a little bit, you know, once I get that motor mount back on that frame rail. You know, that way I can slide it one way or the other. I think I'm about a 1/4 inch back. Or I might have to bring it a little bit forward. It don't matter. Whatever it is, we're going to do it. Now, that other side, where that's back that far, you know, it's like a 1/2 inch or a whole inch back on that frame mount from eyeballing it. You know, I was eyeballing it from the center of the mount to where it should be at, you know. Might be able to cut them and just stick them right back in there where they was at. You know, that would be great. But the driver's side looks like it might be back 1 inch, maybe a 1/2 inch, you know, to make it work. That bracket we got on that side, I'm just going to make a 3 bolt design, get it in there, probably use a piece of that flat stock that we got over here, cut a hole in that bracket, slide it through our plate, weld it up solid from the back, or at least tack it up, so that way if we need to move it or whatever, we can get that plate in there. We'll put a flat plate to the outside of that, extension. And then once we get that bolted up or welded out fully, and that other one welded out fully, we'll be able to call it done. That'll be the motor stabbed. I'm pulling this power steering pump off. I haven't talked to my brother about getting that other steering rack off that other truck, but I think it's just manual steering, so it's not a big deal, you know. We got all the pulleys or whatever on that. Now, if I can figure out a way or get somebody to make some kind of pulley to where I can get on that or whatever, you know, there's a couple pulleys, there's a couple idlers here. I might be able to figure out a way to put something on there, bolt something on there, some kind of way. You know, I do got an idler pulley on that fan. You know, that's a good pulley to just be able to mark it out, drill some holes, and then it's got 3 holes to the front of that crank pulley. You could flip that around backwards. That pulley right there, you could take and make a plate that has 3 holes in it to where you could bolt that up and then bolt it up to that idler pulley. That'll give you something to where if you could get that and get that belt tight with a bracket, you could make that happen with what we got. You know, I'm still studying on that, been reading up what and all they offer for this. As far as that plate on the back of this right here, it looks like it's just like just make a flat plate with 2 bolts, silicone that baby, tighten it up. If that's the case, that's not going to be a big deal. That gives us a lot more room to the back of the motor. That way, you know, you ain't got to be smacking on the firewall. You could potentially use that, but to use that, you're going to have some kind of line that's made to go into that power steering rack. So I currently don't have nothing like that, but I think I do have a manual steering box up there in the junkyard. To get it off of that truck, I mean, I did offer a guy a trade, but he's backed out before, and it's been so long, and I know he had health problems, so, you know, I'm just going to swap it out probably with that manual steering rack for now. If it is manual steering, I'm pretty sure it is. If memory serves correct, it had a manual steering box on it. I don't know if it's the difference between 2-wheel drive and 4-wheel drive or whatever, but I might be able to get up there at the junkyard and get something off of it. If that's the case, we'll put manual steering on it, you know, to make it happen right now. You know, all I gotta do is unbolt the tie rods, and it's got 2 bolts to hold that rack on there. The motor's already out of that one, the motor's already out of that one. I'll hit Sam up and see if I can get that. So, but that's probably a day. All of our bolts are in our plate all the way around. Feels good, looks good. They tightened up really nice. I got the 2 inches that I wanted. Did have to wait on the bolts, not a big deal. So we get that other plate made for the other side, and I'm gonna make a stab. We'll take, and it'll be simple as taking a self tapper and drilling a hole in a piece of plate that we've got, the extra piece. After we make a cardboard template, I'll just kind of drill the holes in it to where we can get it. If we get it in there to where we can get it fitted like we did that one. That one still needs a little work now. It looks a little rough. Need to clean that up and kind of roll the edges to make it look clean enough to where I'm happy, and a flap disc, and I might even use some DA paper to, you know, make sure it's real nice, smooth, cleaned up, whatever. Not a show truck. Just basically trying to get that motor down in there. Now we could take that exhaust, stick it right out the fender, and be a hoorah and let her eat. To get the power steering, or get the steering rack going for now, I think I do have a power steering, or just a manual rack. And then it just basically be, once we get that motor stabbed and it's got motor mounts on it, you know, we pull them off there, clean them up, dress them up just as beautiful as we can, spray paint them. Need to pressure wash this motor off. I leave it a little bit dirty. I use that grease to make templates or something. And once we do all that, hey, that's a job site. And it's basically hooking up the motor to make it start. And then I'm just going to get one of those aftermarket. I watched a guy You just got to shift it manually like a throttle body, but you use what you got. You just hook the wires up and use the column, and you hit the button for the overdrive. That's not a big deal. That's, you know, that'll work. That will work. But I'm eventually going to try to get the power steering hooked up. If not, it's not a big deal. At least you can drive the thing. You know, and then we're going to have to do something with the transfer case. I figured out it's got a different transfer case than I thought. I still got to identify it to make sure 100% positively what we got. But it looks like most people offer something you can just bolt right on there, and you can have a shifter in the floor. And that's what I would want. The fair, you know, fair money, that's not bad. And they do offer a power steering option for this to do whatever you wanted to do, but obviously you're losing your AC compressor. I'm hoping I can plug this line up to that AC compressor. It looks like it's the same freaking thing, same size holes and all that. And then, you know, I don't know how good the AC will be, but it did work on this truck. You know, it was good to go. I got an evaporator leaking on the Jeep to get it fixed. It's so late in the season, it don't matter now. I found it. It's got a hole in the evaporator. So, it needs an evaporator and a line. It's got a line leaking. And I think it needs a new dryer. So, it'd be quite a bit to get that AC going on that one. So, not a big deal. But that's probably going to be a day for today to get those bolts in. Had to wait till later in the day. It rained earlier. And then I was able to figure out that's going to work as far as getting it bolted up. I'm going to try to roll it over here and see how hard it's going to be to whatever. I want it to be to where I can get the starter out of wherever it's going to be stabbed at. Hopefully close enough to where you can get it in and out without having to do a bunch of extra stuff. Now those motor mounts will take a lot of work. You know, it still needs a lot of cleaning. It still needs a flap disc, spray painted. But they got to get in there and fit what I got first. You know, I'll weld them up solid to make sure the bolts you can unbolt that motor mount from the center of it and unbolt the motor plate off the motor. We'll get it out and get it all welded up, finessed up, whatever it takes, spray painted back in there, and the motor mount welded back to the frame rail. That's a lot. So, probably we get all that to where we can, whatever. I want to be able to take the motor mounts, take it up there closer to the electricity for our welder, where it has a shorter line on it, and get it welded out 100%, and hopefully we put it back and we didn't warp it. That's the next thing. So, but you know, you're going to have the motor probably out to weld out the motor mounts on the frame rail 100%. And then, you know, I'll see what it takes to get that steering rack in there. We'll unbolt that, make a plate for that. I mean, a manual steering rack, not a big deal. It beats trying to whatever until you can figure it out. Now, you can put that motor down in there and try to figure out something. You know, worst comes down to worst, you could always put a vintage air unit on it. And, you know, they might offer a thing to where you can put the power steering option they offer and swap out that AC compressor, or they might have like a kit that offers both. You know, I don't know what it's going to would take to adapt the lines into that rack. It's a lot. Okay, manual steering, not a big deal. On a truck, not a big deal. Get it where we shift it out in and out of four-wheel drive, and then you can do that electronic box. I made a bid on one. You know, I'm like, well, you know, it's just hit them in the knees, and you know, they might just want to make a little bit of money. I did make an offer, you know, on eBay. I seen a guy hooked one up. He said it's pretty simple. He said it's got a, but he had a shifter put on his to where he could just do it in the floor. But you know, he had a just a regular steering column. He didn't have a way to do that. Now you can hook it up on that steering column. It works up with the shifter, and we could use what we got and just have a button for the overdrive. I repeated myself a few times, but that's kind of my thinking behind it. And then to hook that exhaust up ain't going to be no big deal. To hook up the power steering the way we're talking, that would be a lot. Could put a manual rack in it and call it done. I mean, that would be the most sensible thing to do. Or you could buy that power steering option that they offer without the AC, but I want to keep the AC if we can. If you lose power steering to the AC, I mean, I drove a truck around 3-4 years, it wasn't that bad. So